Hey Nat, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
No, absolute pleasure. Pretty stoked to be on here with you. We're in the thick of it with the women's series, and Tani's been talking to all kinds of incredible women. But since I met you, I just had to wrestle this one off Tani because I wanted to chat with you.
Well, I can chat with her another time. That's fine.
That's a good point. We've got nothing but abundance as we're in a podcast
Totally.
space.
Yeah.
Um, no, we've just been talking about the fact that you've been to the US 9 times. It's whether you have an abundance of time to jump on with us again.
Sounds like advantage. Yeah, yes. No, I always have time for this. Always, always.
It was so good to meet you as well at Revitalize. I think that was a surprise. I didn't know you were going to be there. For everyone, that was in Arizona. We're at the Mind Body Greens. I don't know what you call it, just to catch up with cool people. And saw you at drinks and got to hang out and have a chat about things.
I,
Yeah.
it was really good. You're like, hey, I know you. I was like,
Yeah, I mean, like you're in the health scene in Oz. You're gonna know, like I think I saw your face at those couch sessions that you did with a
yeah.
bunch of wonderful women back in the day.
Back
So
in the day.
it's cool to be chatting with you here, especially myself being the father of a 2-year-old beautiful girl. It's one thing I'm really loving. Oh, she's a cutie. One thing I'm really enjoying about, I've always enjoyed about Super Feast is I've got a lot of women that I always talk to, a lot of mums, a lot of young women, students, and I've learned a lot about women's health. And because there's so many women coming to herbs and coming to what I do, wanting to get a real, sink their teeth into like what's going on with my body and how do I go on this beautiful roller coaster of life with this body. I've learned a lot, but I've realized I need to start getting a little bit deeper, especially since I'm going to be having these transformations and transitions of, like in 10 years, I'm going to be like knocking on the door of having a teenage girl. And I really want to be able to go on that roller coaster and not just sit in the shadows as Tani really takes that on. I want to be able to have those appropriate conversations and just a knowing, be able to hold the space as a father. And so I wanted to chat with you today, especially because your book, Beautiful You, is really what I really loved about it is I'm reading I haven't got my hands on a copy. Just
I
I
have
can
to
just
get you a copy. Have
I
to
need.
get you a copy.
We'll have several copies by the like by the time this is out, I'm going to have been digging into the book, and it was just really empowering. It was just like simplicity, getting in touch with your body, learning the messages, getting it into the home, turning yourself into the practitioner. I love that. It's just such simple empowerment. So where are you, you're just beaming with pride when just talking
I,
about this book. I must how we were talking about it in
I know,
Arizona.
right? Well, I have to say it's the hardest book that I've ever written. And I don't know why that is, because it's been, when someone says, how long does it take to write a book? Not that long, but
Mm.
this book had been in my head for a really long time. And I've had people that have since come to me and just reminded me in the last, since the book's actually been published, saying, I remember you talking about this 5 years ago. And I'm like, I really have. There was 4 years in between these two, my book now, Beautiful You, and my last book. So I've wanted to write this book forever because I realized that if we fix it before it's broken, we are changing the landscape of our health forever.
Mm.
And that to me, after seeing so many women in the clinic and treating so much heartbreak, it was to me a no-brainer. And since the book's come out, I've had amazing people say also to me, oh my goodness, you have found an absolute gap in the market. But I really think, just in terms of what you're saying and speaking to, say, a 10-year-old, I actually think that the education, there's not a definite time it starts. Kids start to ask questions really early on.
Mm.
And we make up all sorts of silly stories to try and maybe protect them because we think it's not a good conversation to have.
What's a good example of one of the stories we make up?
How a baby's made.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and we just sort of make all sorts of stories up. It's magical, to a 4 or a 5-year-old that's asking that, we might have all sorts of stories. The stork brings the baby,
Mm.
And kids, like I was saying to you before we started, kids aren't emotionally attached to what happens. If you say that, just give them the facts, and you don't need to dive into it. But if you're just saying, I know with my children, mummy's got eggs, daddy's got sperm, and the egg and the sperm have to get together, and that's how baby's made. kids aren't attached to that. They're just like, oh, okay, that makes sense, and move on. It was only recently that my daughter actually one day came to me and she said she's just turned 10. And no, sorry, she's turning 11 in April, actually. It feels like yesterday. So does Mind Body Green Revitalize. That feels like yesterday too. She said, hang on, if you've got eggs and daddy's got sperm, how do they get together? And I said to her, oh, right, well, that's a choice that you make. If you want them to get together, mummy and daddy need to spend time together. And then, you know, you can potentially make a baby. And my son, who's 6, yells out, yeah, you got to hug and you got to kiss, you got to do this stuff and whatever. And, you know, but they had some awareness. It wasn't like this magical event. And then it was the cutest part of this was she didn't care about that. She was like, oh, yeah, okay, that makes sense. You know, daddy's got to be near mummy and that's how that happens. What she was really upset about was the fact that she says to me, hang on, you can have a baby? And I'm like, yeah, I could have a baby. And she's like, you could make one today. And I said, well, remember, you've got to have an egg and the egg has to be released and the sperm has to fertilize the egg. She's like, yeah, but it could happen now. And I said, yeah, it could happen now. And she was like, and you're not doing this? She was so upset with the fact that we weren't having another baby, but it was something that we could totally do today. She didn't care about any of the other stuff. All she cared about was that. So, you know, I think it's gentle conversations whenever they're asked, at whatever stage and whatever age it's appropriate for. But it just means that, you know, the facts are the facts and nothing's a surprise and it's just normal. Like, you know, we don't hide the fact that we need to blow our nose or sometimes clear wax out of our ears. It's just part of what happens. So I think having these age-appropriate conversation is very important. And I just don't think we do a good job of it because it's not ever been the done thing. It's been something that I know as a young woman, my mum sat me down to have the talk and I had no idea about any of it, bar what I'd heard from friends. And when you're hearing stuff from people and it's all hearsay, I mean, gosh, you come up with all sorts of things, don't you?
Yeah.
About what's happening. But, you know, in our research, we've discovered that 30% of teenagers are Googling for information around sex and reproductive health. And, you know, if you think about if you're Googling anything to do with sex, really what's going to show up is probably porn. And so these young teenagers, that's their first experience of what sex is. And, you know, it's setting up completely unrealistic expectations of what their first, you know, time of their first sexual experience is going to be. So we've really got a responsibility, I think, as parents and as elders to just really gently start to have these beautiful conversations. You know, that's where it starts.
I really like the fact that the tide is changing, and it's also nice that, you know, you're putting a book like this out there and starting these conversations, because just leaving the expectation on someone that you don't do it the way, you don't teach sex the way that you were taught in schools. We're now learning that's inappropriate. Do it a better way. And then that can be confusing when you're in you've got a hectic life and a couple of kids and you're like, well, gosh, how do I do this? We don't realize that we need to go back to school ourselves, and that's a skill in how to have these conversations. And that's what I'm really enjoying about, I've watched your work for a long time. I really like the way you do that and the way that empowerment comes about it. I want to ask, when we look down the track, you mentioned heartbreak being there for so many women. I've got a sense of it, but what is that heartbreak?
Well, I think what's interesting is, I mean, there are certainly people out there that all they ever want and you know this person, right? They're the person that all they ever wanted as a baby. Yeah. Like that's literally what they've lived for. Now, that's not me. I was never like that. Don't get me wrong. I have 2 children. I love them, but I was never really clucky for children. I never was like, oh my gosh. So there is I would say a small percentage of people that are just basically that's their goal in life and that's what they want. But then there's another percentage of people who get to a time in their life where they decide that they would like to have a baby, only to discover that they actually maybe can't. And I think that's where the heartbreak comes in, because you never realize you want something as much as when you can't have it, right? And the stress and the anxiety that's involved with these women actually becomes the bigger problem over the structural infertility or the physiological infertility. And changing their mindset to believe that their bodies can do it is very, very tricky. And that's what I would say I'm in the business. I mean, yes, I'm a Chinese medicine practitioner and I integrate as much as I can in terms of how, integrating Western, Eastern medicine together. But that is the hardest thing to treat. Absolutely. It's not necessarily treatable. It's more about a process and a belief that you have to instill. So, I see this all the time because look, my awareness around infertility, I guess, is skewed because I only see the people that can't have babies. I don't see the people that are fist pumping their hair going, hey, Nat, I'm pregnant. Look at me, I'm awesome.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't get to see those women. I get to see the ones that are heartbroken, that have been trying for months, years on end, that have done maybe IVF and not been successful, whatever that might be. And all because 20 years ago, they were prescribed potentially the pill or something along those lines that has actually masked their symptoms up till a point that they want to fall pregnant. And they were led to believe that don't worry, when the time comes, we'll just give you another pill and then you're going to be fine and that will fix everything. Now, you and I know that that's not the case and it never has been. But unfortunately, we're finding out so much more information about the long-term effects of synthetic birth control or hormones now more than ever. And so, I just think that if we could fix it before it's broken and we could be educating 16, 17, 18, even 24-year-olds, what is endometriosis? Why do you have it? If you have PCOS, what is your body telling you? It's not a punishment, and it's not just something that you woke up with one day. It's a lifetime that's led to you having enough symptoms now that your body's screaming at you that something's got to change. And so what is that? How do we do that? And it's this every day. It's what you do each and every day that actually contributes the most. What environment are you putting your body in? What are you subjecting your cells to? It's lots of little things that add up that actually will either turn on or off body responses. So we can turn off a lot of this. We know this, but a lot of women don't realize that. And especially if they are going to their doctor and their doctor's not progressive or integrative, it's not their fault. This information isn't necessarily scientifically yet proven enough times to be the case, even though you and I know that. I always say, if you want to know what the next big thing is in the medical world, look into the complementary medicine world. They'll tell you what the next big thing is going to be because we've already done it.
Yeah,
Totally. And that's not because we're cocky or anything. It's just that we've got our finger on it. We've got our ear to the ground and we discover it first. And then it needs to be proven and proven and proven again to then be proven to be successful. So, I remember speaking with friends about probiotics 10 years ago and being told I was crazy. And here we are. Everyone's very accepting now that the gut flora is a big deal. So I just think that if we can get to these young women and empower them with information and actually get curious, not fear the worst when they get a diagnosis at 17, say, that they've got PCOS. Let's not fear that. Let's look at what your body's telling you, actually embrace it because you know what's wrong, and then start to use as much as you can in terms of your toolkit as to what you can do to change that landscape.
You brought up a couple of amazing things. I want to just keep on diving down several rabbit holes. You talked about the capacity for mindset to be shifted and transformed, especially in those instances where you can't get pregnant and then start having the conversations of getting yourself into the position where you possibly could because you're listening to your body. And then going back to the mindset around that. If you've got a teenage girl, for instance, and you are the parents of that girl and you are in a mindset where symptoms are bad and you just basically need your fingers crossed and you just, go along and do all the cultural norm things and you just hope and most people kind of get away with it for long enough to think that, this culture and the way that it works is working, but you just fingers crossed to hope you don't get any symptoms. If you do get symptoms, oh shit, this is bad. We better go to the doctor. Now, the mindset that I got coming from just looking at those chapters within your book in terms of really welcoming these symptoms into your life. Now that I think is a huge one. I don't sneeze at this distinction and trying to get this into the household in terms of being really welcoming, because I know what it's like when you've had long days and long weeks and it's festive season and all of a sudden these symptoms come up in the body, and it's just like, oh my gosh, it's just so convenient right now for me to not look at those and use some, like, you know, use some herbal things, or use some, you know, not that they're using medication, but in the, like, you know, in like conventionally use some medication, shut it down, because it's just too much to look at it, because we've been programmed to believe that we don't have the right to go in and know what our bodies are doing and then execute some change. And so I want to talk about that distinction in terms of, firstly, these symptoms are beautiful blessings, and let's chat about how this is actually practical and simple within itself. Then, in terms of becoming a detective, before we jumped on, I was talking about how I love talking to practitioners, because practitioners are detectives. I'm personally not going into the practitioner realm, first of all, because I need to be able to go and gallivant outside of that relationship. But I'll get there in the future. I know I will. But talking to practitioners, it always really humbles me in the simpleness of being a detective and asking questions and looking at where this could come from, looking at your diet, looking at what herbs are and aren't present, et cetera, et cetera. Now, how do you see this detective work going from the practitioner realm and I like it being held there? It's because when things get gnarly, I want to go and sit with a specialist who knows what, you know, like really, who knows what they're doing. But the bridging of that into the household for mums and dads, and then young women themselves to be able to become their own detectives. How do you approach that?
A couple of things. I don't want to forget the things that I want to say. First of all, I get, apparently, especially parents all the time say to me, oh, how do I tell my 16-year-old she must do this, this, and this? And I'm like, first of all, you can't. That she's 16. She's not going to listen anyway. She's going to do whatever the hell she wants to do. But this is why the conversation needs to start early, because we need to lead by example. And if we don't understand ourselves as adults and as parents, then we're in big trouble, because how can we do that? And kids will observe and they will absorb, and eventually it all comes back full circle. So I would say the first thing is that you need to be empowered. You need to know what your body's telling you before you can worry about what your, you know, our innate response is to worry about, of course, our children first. But we actually kind of can't do that if we don't understand ourselves. So it's definitely a question of, do you understand your own body and what is it telling you today? And then being able to use that to be able to empower our next generation and our children. I mean, in the clinic, what's really interesting is, and this is why I do what I do so publicly, because if you're not already doing what I talk about as steps in any of my books, I'm going to make you go away and do that as a starting point. That's what those books are there for. They're not there because you're an endocrinologist and you understand, you know, the depths of hormones. Not at all. Yeah. They're there as a tool to help you for, like I said before, I call it the everyday principle, what you need to do each and every day, which actually adds up so much. And then come back to me and then say, Nat, this is what I'm left with. And I can't quite work out what this is. Now, I also understand that when we're not well, it's all too overwhelming. And I have patients say to me all the time, I just don't know where to start. Please, can you just tell me where to start? And so I love that too, because I can then pick out one or two things that are really important for them to start to do to create change. So, I mean, look, there's hundreds of things that we can potentially do or need to do. What I would say to people is, just choose one thing and start with one new thing. And if you're really stuck with what that would be, well, nutrition's paramount. So if you're not starting there, you have to. And, you know, I get this all the time. I had a patient last week. She sat down. She's like, do you know, if I just eat better and I go to bed at the right time, I actually just feel better. And I was like, and? She's like, yeah, but I need you to fix me. And I'm like, but you just said, if you eat better and you sleep better and you do the right things, you're fine. And she's like, yeah, but I don't want to do that. And I'm like, well, you have to. Like, there's no skimping on that. And, you know, genetically we're all different. And some of us can get away with more and some of us can get away with less. And that's just the way the cookie crumbles. But I really think that if you're not doing the basics, you must start doing the basics, because it's, I mean, look, you can come into my clinic every day of the week if you want. That's a lot of drain on both of us. Yeah. Financially, time-wise, for so many reasons. So that's not necessary. And why, like, how can I empower you? Don't give your power to me. I mean, I'll take it, but I don't need that of everybody. I need you to be empowered. I need you to be able to say, hey, actually, this is what's going on. I can feel it. I can feel change, whether it's positive or negative. That becomes a far better conversation, I think, rather than take this magic pill, which they don't exist anyway. And, you know, I love supplements. I really, really love supplements. But for me, they are a short-term solution. And I want sustainable, everyday things that we can add in. So, you know, like you said, how can we introduce things into our cooking, or what herbs can we include? What can we, when's the last time you looked at your plate and actually went tick, 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 tick? I know what I'm doing here, and it's so much of this is therapeutic. We don't do that. We eat to fill a void because we're hungry. But when we can start to get some intuition around that as well, and bring in certain ingredients to our nutrition, you don't even need the supplements anymore. And I've seen this. One amazing example of this is intermittent fasting. And I guess, would I recommend intermittent fasting for women under 18? Maybe not for long periods, but it's not going to do you any harm either. And that is that I have literally, for all of my patients that have PCOS that I have got to fast, I've got them fasting, I have taken most of them off pretty much all of their supplement regime, besides maybe magnesium. And that was a game changer for me. I was like, okay, well, if I can get their body to behave without, you know, just with nutrition and not eating and eating, you know, this is interesting. Like, there's something in this. So I really think we rely on the magic pill. But unfortunately it doesn't exist.
Well, what's your take then on, because this is what I love about this current world that we're living in, is there is a knowledge that I know you're coming here and you want the magic pill, even if it's subconscious, and even you might have progressed to the extent where you know the power's in your hands, but maybe from where you've come from, maybe, I don't know what's lacking, but, you know, I know that if I just sleep and eat, that it's going to be okay. Yet I'm willing and you know, maybe not able yet pouring resources into going and asking for the solution straight away. Because we're talking about people's personal cultures and lives, that, you know, we got to look at this and go, like, for decades, I need to be eating in a way that's going to allow my hormones to rock and not bring up these symptoms again. Yet I have this life that I need to live, and it's very convenient to just go and then rely on a practitioner and supplements to get that symptom down so I can keep on rocking. How do you approach that gap?
The thing is, if you don't look at the reason why something's being turned on, let's call it that, then it's always going to be there, right? Now, unfortunately, the biggest hormone disruptor that I see is stress. And stress isn't just running late or being busy or being overextended or overcommitted. Stress is, how well is your liver detoxifying? Is your gut working properly? What do you wake up and think the first thing that's in your mind every morning? What's your environment like at home? Is your car a mess? I don't know. Stress is so many things. It's not just we associate, I think most of us associate stress with being busy. I empower my patients. I say, look, I want to get you to a point where I fine-tune things for you when you need that, when you have overextended yourself, when you are under the pump, when you have done too much, when your digestive system isn't where it could be. I will iron out the stress creases. But if you keep subjecting yourself to those stresses, you're going to need to keep coming back. So, I mean, I'll say this. I don't think that in terms of my skill as an acupuncturist and a hands-on healer, that's not where my skill lies. My skill lies in actually being able to sit and empathize and talk to the patient. Diagnose, I'm good at, and really sitting with them and giving them the time to talk it through. And that's where I know that's where my skill lies now. So you can go and see I can treat you, and I get great results. Don't get me wrong, but I think that's because of that, you know, combination of all of those things. That's where, but my strength lies in empowering the patient. And just ensuring that you have an outlet within your own life then to take, like, people, what are they talking out? Like, what is the talking out that then allows the decompression to occur? One of the things I love to sit with patients and say to them is, okay, well, you're here today and you've got this problem. What happens if this problem was put here to help you get exactly what you need? What happens if it's actually, well, it's a catalyst to change, right? And what would that be? If you could have whatever you wanted when it came to your health and your well-being, what would that look like? How would that feel? Who would you be? I guess for a lot of patients, they don't necessarily realize they don't want to get better. They are happy to be stuck in a perpetual state of illness because it feels safe. And so it's really confronting to think that maybe that's not how life's going to be once you get better. And who would I be if my life wasn't this? Who would I be? So there's so many facets to health, right? And I guess we're getting deep here, but I think that helping them to understand that that's okay. It's going to be okay. You're going to actually, what would it feel like to be this person? What would it feel like to be pregnant? Or what would it feel like to not be overweight, or whatever that might be? And really getting them to align to that feeling rather than the goal. We're mad for a goal, a target. We're like, when I get to this, then I'm going to be this. It's like, let's let go of that. How would it feel if you were there? And that's what we align to, the feeling of wellness, the feeling of being, I don't know, lighter, the feeling of being pregnant, the feeling of being not having pain, pain-free. So that's what I get patients to align to. And that's not always easy. 50% of people are glass half empty. And there's, some that I can totally get over the line in the first appointment to help them see. But here's what I'll say is people who recover from any type of condition on some level believe they can. And so that's what it's about. I'll say to patients all the time, think of that person that that's bat crap crazy, like that person is just like totally, but they have all of what you might consider the luck. They're lucky, they get everything they want. It's because they believe they can. So how do I help you believe you can? And even if it's just this little glimmer of hope, that's all it takes. And I've been there before. I have a little boy that's got a genetic condition. I totally get what it feels like to feel like there is never going to be a solution for something. And I guess finding a solution for him made me realize I can find a solution for anything. So I think that's probably my main motivation too, and being able to translate that into hormones, not cystic fibrosis. But I know that's definitely part of my path as well as a practitioner.
Yeah, and I can feel it. I couldn't put to words what I could feel. Some of the real, as you said, going deep, some of the real deep medicine, it's all very deep. Some of it a little less able to put into a book than others. And that's because I would like to dive into what you would like me to know when I have a teenage girl and the kinds of conversations you'd like me to be able to have. I just want to comment there that if you're going to see a skill enter into a mother or father's repertoire, or even into just young girls everywhere, to be able to do exactly what you just did and go through the conversation in that process, to be like, look, let's go into a feeling state. And at that, what I can sense at that point is you lie there, possibly shattering an identity that you have around that habits that have got yourself to the point where you have all these symptoms, and you're there within the feeling state, and then able to go through the process going, wow, I'm really going to still have a life and purpose, and I'm going to know what actions to take. It's not going to be a completely daunting new task and new me that isn't relatable anymore, but you can relate to that person that's going to be really well or be pregnant, whatever that is. So thanks for diving into that with me.
You're welcome. You asked.
I love asking these questions. I love the rabbit holes. So I'm a father with a teenage daughter. What would you like to see in my skill set, and what conversations would you like to see being had in the household at, say, 16 years old, and what groundwork?
Yeah, well, you've already done the groundwork, right? Because we spoke about that before. So it's not new territory at all. It's just the next phase or the next level of awareness that someone needs to have. I think, like I said before, no one wants to be preached to, especially not a 16-year-old. And so telling them what they have to do is never going to work. But having these conversations, and I think also just really leaning in and listening. And I think for a starting point, you as a dad wanting to be involved in that is a pretty big deal. A lot of dads wouldn't. And I think, again, having this conversation as parents, I think, is really important. You being comfortable with your sexuality obviously helps, you know, as a parent. Both parents owning that and embracing that, I think, is really, really important. But I think it comes from, I think it actually just comes from gentle, everyday conversation. I don't think there's a standout peak that it has to happen. This has to be the conversation at this point in time. Kids, especially boys and girls, they're all going to be different. They're all going to have different challenges at different times. And I actually wonder, how big is the challenge going to be at 16 if you're already empowered? If this is something that you've already talked about. I don't know the answer to this, really. I'm watching some people that I know who their children are of that age, and it's just an open conversation. Sometimes it's at the dinner table. Sometimes it's in the car when they're driving to an appointment. Sometimes it's in the supermarket being responsible for their sexual health. You know, I think it's just part of the everyday conversation. I will tell you this, in my research, this current generation, so my daughter's age and older, are the most responsible, the less likely to get into trouble, the most well-educated, aware, respectful in comparison to any other generation. And I loved when I found this out in my research, because I was like, wow, it's the time to do this. They are hungry for information. They want to learn the facts. They want to know. So it's not like you're trying to coax them into something that is taboo or, totally off the radar. They already want this. They're already saying that. But here's the thing I will say. I think we are often telling them the opposite. We're often saying, oh gosh, all you do is spend time on your phone. You're not social. You're this, you're that, you're this, you're that, whatever that might be, reinforcing exactly what we don't want them to be. Yet they're going, oh, well, this is what you're telling me that I am, so I need to live up to this expectation. So I actually think that there's a lot of power in being aware of this and not doing that. And the rest just comes. I think it's actually guided by the child or the teen, not us, but by them in terms of what they need. What do they need to know? When are they ready to know more? They're going to ask when they're ready. So it's just being open. I think it's actually just being open and aware that we have this responsibility, that you, especially as a father, should be just as invested in this as your partner, whoever, that might be. It might be, we're living at a time where there's all types of relationships and combinations of relationships. And so it's just a matter of, tuning in with what they need.
And you're really reinforcing the fact that if what's going on within the household is us having, as parents, having real conversations about our own cycles, our own reproductive organs, our own organ health, and really looking at our own symptoms all the time and not shying away from them. Because, kids, and even if there's no kids, just like life in itself is this big mirror up upon yourself. And I think especially with kiddies, they're like, if you're not looking at it, I'm not going to look at it. You can't fake your way through this, mate.
No, totally. And I will reinforce what you just said. I'm talking about loved ones. So our responsibility, whether you're an auntie, whether you're the next door neighbor, whether you're a parent, whatever that is, it's not just about our own children. It's about us collectively. And it's coming together again back to that community state. I really think that's a big other part of the puzzle that's missing, is that we moved away from the collective. We moved away from a community. We've tried to do things solo. This is what I see in the clinic. Women have miscarriage, but they don't talk about it with anybody, because I actually don't have the answer. Because why? Like, why? Why are we not talking about this? They're going through IVF because they can't fall pregnant, but they're too ashamed to tell anybody. But why? Like, why are we not talking about this? If we're talking about it as adults, these conversations, then these conversations for teenagers, whether it's about their first sexual encounter or what their vulva does, it's just part of the conversation that's always been had. So somewhere we've disconnected from this, and that's why that's why I wrote this book, because I think it's the missing link. And of course I'm going to be biased, but I really do. And you say I do light up when I talk about it, because to me it's a no-brainer. It's like, this is missing. We need this. And here's the other thing I will say. Perhaps you're not great at having the conversation. Perhaps you actually don't even want to entertain the thought of having a conversation. I've got a book for that. So that's the thing. It's bridging the gap between it as well. You might not have all the answers because you don't know what to say, and that's okay too. I know that when the book was being edited, my publisher's 15-year-old daughter read the book and put her 2 cents in, which I'm so grateful for. And what she had to say was amazing. And the questions that she had around what I had written, and then the feedback that she gave to her mum was basically, "Mum, you sucked at this job, and why didn't I have this book a couple of years ago?" So I tried to write the book in a way that I want this book in schools, actually. That's my big aim for 2019. I want this in schools. And I really think that I've written it with that in mind, because the education department as it stands, as you said before, there's a lot missing. And that's because I'm just going to call it, some old fart somewhere has made a decision that that's not appropriate.
Yeah.
And who is that person to tell us that? I get really frustrated by that, because, no one's hiding other parts of conversation, whether it's politics or stuff that I don't really, want to engage in, but I still had to do it, didn't I? Because I still had to learn it. This is still the facts, So I really want to challenge that. And I've written it in a way where I think it's really factual, like I said, and really gentle, and it's not opinionated, and it's not even gender specific. It's really gently written. And I think it would be appropriate for any teenager, whether they're of whatever background.
Yeah, it's nice. You can feel that this, in the next couple of generations, we're going to see a swing away from that taboo conversation, or it being a naughty or an inappropriate conversation, which is an absolute crock of shit.
Well, we can't pretend it doesn't exist. Kids are curious. They want to know. And when it comes to even things like sex, they're doing it anyway. So, let's make it safe. Let's make it something that we actually have a responsibility to do that, I think. And yeah, there's lots of conversations that can be had around this, but even something like I get a lot of slack for saying I don't think teenage girls should be on the birth control, because mothers saying, "Well, how dare you? I think a teen pregnancy would be far worse." And I'm like, okay, 2 things here. Actually, would it be far worse? Because we don't know the long-term consequences, and your daughter could actually end up infertile. So, is it the worst thing that could happen? But also, I would say that teens need to be using barrier methods when they're having sex. STDs are a massive problem, and if they're just relying on synthetic birth control, then they're not protecting themselves either. So there's lots of conversations, but I do think that the biggest gift that we can give any teenager is understanding how his or her body works, with a hands down.
Do you mind if we quickly dive down the contraception? Like, I know that's really huge, but it's an interesting one. I don't know whether this, like, how relevant this conversation is, or whether it's a little bit too left of center. I'm very familiar with just go on the pill. It's very normal, and it's completely justified, because if you were to get pregnant, then, oh my gosh, that would be the worst. Why does that come about? Why is that even? You said there are barrier methods. I don't know what your view in terms of appropriate contraception for teenagers to be using. Condoms exist, but what I hear more and more from just anecdotally from women when they were teenagers is he doesn't want to use a condom, and that somehow, or even for women, I mean, that somehow justifies this. The fact that then the pill is just what we need to do. Like, I don't have an exact question, but what's your 2 cents?
Okay, so here's what I'll say around this, and I'm glad you asked this. I think that reproductive health and this information does weigh really heavier in for women. And that's because we are the ones that have to bear the burden, really, of contraception and or falling pregnant. So, I know when I was a teen and I overheard my parents having conversation with family friends that their boys were going through puberty, and, they were all laughing at the table, and they were like, "Oh, I just told him to go to his room and sort it out." And, everyone was having a good time. Now, flip that and start to talk about a woman going through puberty, or a young girl going through puberty. Nobody's laughing. It's not funny. It's very serious. It's not fun. It's not fun, And I think that's part of this conversation, is actually changing that to be less heavy. How can it be both men and women, or young boys or teenage boys and teenage girls? It's both of their responsibility. It's not just her responsibility. And educating them on the long-term effects of STDs, I think, is very important. It's crucial. I asked my publisher once this book came out, I'm like, now can I do one for teen boys? Because that, to me, is actually the next piece of the puzzle. Because if we can get men to understand themselves and women, and we can get women to understand themselves and men, I don't think we'd be having this conversation. It just would be part of what needs to happen. So, I mean, I think condoms and barrier methods for teenagers should just be a non-negotiable. And I think that, you know, just like I guess we've gotten to a point where someone who is publicly smoking is kind of shamed nowadays because it's a health risk, why wouldn't it be the same with protection when it comes to sex? So I think, again, I think that this is changing, and I do think that these teens are more responsible than what we might have been when we were teenagers. And I think it's about, again, continuing to have the conversation, showing what can happen if you're not using a condom. You know, what is someone, I never forget my first experience of sitting in on someone's surgery, and the surgeon opened the woman up, and it was for fertility purposes. He wanted to give her a laparoscopy to see what was going on. He's gone in, he was like, get me out. She's actually riddled with STD, chlamydia. There's nothing I can do. Just close it back up again. And I was like, oh my goodness, I bet you as probably whenever that happened, 16, 17, 18, I don't know, she would have had no idea that was going to actually impact her fertility. These conversations need to be had. And again, I know that 16-year-olds aren't wanting babies, but they're keen to learn, like we keep saying. So I think we need to give them more credit than we're giving them already. And just keep on talking about it. Like, really, I think that's an important conversation as well, that STDs are an issue. And here's a question. I know it wouldn't be on the top of your list as a 16-year-old to fall pregnant. I get that. But I was saying to my husband a little while ago, did anyone that you know fall pregnant in high school? And he was like, no. And I'm like, there were 3 girls at my school, and I went to a private Catholic school. There were 3 girls that fell pregnant during my high school years. And oh my gosh, at the time it was like totally like not okay. And it was, you know, it was a big drama. But now fast forward, and I'm like, far out, they're living their best lives while we're still all here having our kids. And I'm sure that their kids are fine too. So not the worst thing that could ever happen. It's probably not part of the plan, but it doesn't mean your life's over either, you know?
That's a big one, because there is that huge taboo sitting around that.
And it's like, you know, you hit the pause button. We're all going to do it at some point if we choose to have children. You hit the pause button for several years, and then you're back at it again, just like all of us are. So I don't know. I just think life throws us what it's supposed to at the time.
Yeah, I hear. Oh my gosh, so many big conversations to be having. It's so good. So, all right, before we pull in, PCOS. You know, you talk about reproductive health. We talk about reproductive organs. We're talking about a lack of gut health, a lack of liver health, and then you start seeing these symptoms arising in the household. What are the symptoms that you want?
Great.
To be looking at.
Well, let's finish with this. So I think women's hormones don't really sort themselves out until they're around 18. So if you're experiencing issues, irregular periods, I wouldn't say a missing period. I'd say if you don't have your period by 16, I'd start to explore that, 15, 16. But if they're irregular, if there's lots of symptoms, I wouldn't jump to any ridiculous conclusions, and I'd definitely be looking at lifestyle issues or lifestyle factors. So, you know, whether periods might be painful, they might be heavy, they might be irregular, there might be acne, there might be weight gain and emotion and you know, erratic emotions. They're probably the top things that I would be looking for young girls to try and look at what's going on and how can we sort that out, because there's definitely you know, probably slightly more of an imbalance than there needs to be. What people need to realize is that around 16, women go through a phase where they actually have symptoms that kind of mimic PCOS. It's temporary, normal, it's supposed to happen, but that's often a time that we draw conclusions that aren't necessarily a problem. We just think it is. So know this information, please, before you do anything drastic like the pill or any other form of, well, I hope that teens would only be prescribed the pill, not a Mirena or something like that, because that's a disaster. And just start to look at, often this time for teenagers is a really highly stressful time. They're going through the later years of schooling. There's a lot of pressure. They're possibly working, possibly playing sport. There's a lot going on, probably more than ever. Like, as once you get to a point where you're either at uni or working 9 to 5, you don't have as many hours in the day to do all those other things. So I think it is a highly busy time, and we need to be aware of that. And that's one factor I'd look at. I'd also look at the environment. What are we subjecting them to? Is the home environment, is the air pure? Is there chemicals? Is there toxins? Anything that's going to disrupt their hormones. So chemicals in body products, in dishwashing liquids, in plastic containers, all of these are known endocrine disruptors. And then the other thing I would also, 3 really easy things to look at, stress, obviously, environment, and then diet or nutrition. Let's not use the word diet because it's not about deprivation. It's just about eating the right things. So, what is their nutrition like? And often as a 16-year-old, it's probably not great. And that's what I've also covered in the book, is that there's really simple, easy recipes that anyone can make. Things that are like one serve meals that they might prepare for school or for they might be young and working, really easy things that tick boxes nutritionally. So there's I think there's over 40 recipes, I can't remember. There's a lot in there that are really simple. And again, just bringing that nutrition, that food as medicine, how can we incorporate these things back into the daily regime to really help to balance out their hormones?
That's a huge one, right? If you just alone ensuring that for their lives they see food preparation and time going into food preparation being there is no way to avoid that as far as I'm concerned.
Absolutely.
And I don't know, it's like everybody in the middle of, it's a silly season as we're recording this. We've just had lots of family here with us. We've got Super Feast rocking, and that's full time. We've got a 2-year-old and all kinds of things going on. And yet I've really, really watched myself in terms of my approach to food. And we had we were I came home yesterday at midday, we had a particular meal. It's going to take 5 hours to prepare.
Yeah, beautiful.
Made time to go and do that. And as a father, and I'm looking down the barrel, and it's that same barrel you look at with, where's the heartbreak, and how do I change my degree, just that little bit so that it's flowing as much as possible. That's one I just can't avoid. So that's stoked that you're putting those recipes in there and sitting that focus on that preparation, because that's just the bread and butter of this whole
Totally. And and there is a lot in there also around, like you said, food, nutrition, but also this whole mindset stuff that we spoke about. I dive into that in the book as well. I talk about emotions. I talk about the challenges that we have. It's quite interactive. So it's the sort of book that you would fill in along the way. You write things in there. You would keep it to yourself, and really teach, things about positive reinforcement and things like manifesting and affirmations and that sort of stuff as well. So it's all there.
Love it. And look, the absolute best thing I feel like coming out, and I imagine for many listening, especially for me, is just that reminder, starting with the man in the mirror and going you can't avoid this. If you don't want to create a dam of symptoms and then be in that position, as you said, where look at your 16-year-old and go, you have to do this, you have to do that. And it's just
not going to work.
It's not going to work. Put in the groundwork now and make sure that it's as smooth as possible, or start right now and start working on yourself so that becomes a norm. And I love it. And I feel I'm really appreciative of you going into the deep nuances of what's going on with your work and the book, Beautiful You, in this podcast, so that when people are really reading those, reading through the chapters and getting all these real practical, good, beautiful steps, that they go, right. And then the actual terrain that it's laying within is, what you've been speaking about here, which I think is great.
Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity. And I'd love to come back if we want to come back and talk about, specific things, whether it's PCOS or endometriosis or infertility or whatever. We can do that too.
I think that'd be rad. So I'll put it out right now, everyone. You can DM me on Superfeast Instagram if there's anything specific you want me to go down the rabbit hole with Nat about. Hey, Nat, we're going to put all the links in the show notes anyway, but anywhere you like people to find you in particular?
It's just the longest surname in the world, just Nat Kringoudis. Everything is under Nat Kringoudis, whether it's, I love hanging out on social media. I actually really am a bit of an Instagram I just love visual things. So I like hanging out there. So if I interact on there and people ask me questions, I try and answer as much as I can, because I think it's really important we have all the information we need. So come find me there. Otherwise, my website has heaps of resources and information as well. So
cool. And go out and grab beautiful you.
Yeah, do that.
Thanks so much. We're definitely going to have you back, and we'll go and do it again.
Amazing. Thanks, Mason.
Thanks.